The blood-red sun sank behind the jagged horizon as Maggie Sutton pressed a cold cloth to her wounded face, the pain of betrayal burning far deeper than the cuts that would forever mark her once delicate features. It was 1876 in the unforgiving territory of Colorado, and her husband's drunken rage had finally manifested into something irreversibly cruel. A knife slashed across her face in a moment of jealous madness. Maggie's hands trembled as she lowered the cloth, daring to examine her reflection in the cracked mirror of the washstand. 3 deep gashes ran from her right temple to the left corner of her mouth, still weeping blood despite her attempts to clean them. Her eye had swollen shut, and her honey-blonde hair was matted with dried blood. "Look what you made me do," Thomas had spat before he'd staggered out the door, leaving her crumpled on the floor of their modest homestead. The accusations he'd hurled made no sense. Wild claims of infidelity with men she barely knew from town. In 8 years of marriage, she had never once been unfaithful, enduring his increasing paranoia and violent outbursts with silent resignation. But this was different. As the shock subsided and reality settled in, Maggie knew she couldn't stay. Not anymore. Not when the next time might be her last. The distant sound of hoofbeats sent terror coursing through her veins. Thomas returning, perhaps? She grabbed the shotgun from above the mantel, her fingers fumbling with shells as she tried to load it with shaking hands. The hoofbeats grew louder, then stopped. Footsteps approached the cabin door. "Mrs. Sutton," a man's voice called, not Thomas. "It's Deputy Miller. Everything all right?" Neighbors heard shouting. Maggie's throat tightened. She couldn't let anyone see her like this. The shame was too much to bear. "I'm fine," she managed to call, her voice cracking. "Just a disagreement." There was a long pause before the deputy responded. "If you're certain, madam, Mr. Sutton's over at Caldwell's saloon, making quite a scene. Thought I should check on you." "Thank you, deputy. I'm turning in for the night." The deputy lingered for a moment longer before his footsteps retreated, and the sound of his horse galloping away filled the evening air. Maggie stood motionless until silence returned. Then, with newfound determination born of desperation, she began to move. She couldn't wait for Thomas to return. She grabbed a small carpet bag and stuffed it with essentials, a change of clothes, the meager savings she'd managed to hide beneath a loose floorboard, and a locket containing a faded photograph of her parents. Her face throbbed with each heartbeat as she wrapped a shawl around her head, hoping to conceal the worst of her injuries. She had no destination in mind, only the burning need to get away. The nearest town was 10 miles east, but Thomas would look for her there. She needed somewhere he wouldn't think to search. The old mining settlement of Silver Creek lay 20 miles west. It had boomed briefly 5 years ago, before most of the silver played out. Now, it was just a shadow of its former self, home to those too stubborn or too broke to leave. Thomas had always spoken of it with disdain. He wouldn't look for her there. Maggie grabbed the reins of their only horse, a steady mare named Penny. The animal nickered softly as Maggie struggled to mount, pain shooting through her body with every movement. She had no way of knowing if she could make it all the way to Silver Creek in her condition, but staying meant certain death. As she rode away from the homestead that had been her prison for 8 long years, Maggie cast one final glance back. There was nothing there worth mourning, only memories of broken promises and shattered dreams. The night grew cold as Maggie rode westward, following the old mining trail that wound through craggy foothills. Her face pulsed with agony, and she could feel warm blood seeping through the makeshift bandages she'd applied. Waves of dizziness washed over her, and more than once she nearly slipped from Penny's back. By midnight, the trail had become treacherous in the darkness, and Maggie's strength was failing. When she spotted a small creek lined with cottonwoods, she guided Penny toward it. She would rest for just a moment, she told herself, just long enough to gather her strength. Dismounting was an ordeal that left her gasping. She tied Penny to a tree branch and collapsed against the trunk, her eyes heavy with exhaustion and pain. Despite her determination to continue, the darkness claimed her consciousness, and she slipped into a fitful sleep. The sound of voices roused her as the first light of dawn broke over the eastern horizon. For a terrifying moment, she thought Thomas had found her, but as her vision cleared, she saw not her husband, but 2 men strangers standing a few yards away, examining her horse. Mighty fine mare, one of the men was saying. Wonder where she came from. Belongs to me, Maggie called out, her voice weak but resolute as she struggled to her feet. The sudden movement sent pain lancing through her head, and she swayed unsteadily. The men turned, startled by her voice. Their expressions shifted from surprise to shock as they took in her battered appearance. Madam? The taller of the two approached cautiously. You need help? Maggie pulled her shawl tighter around her face, but she knew it couldn't hide the damage Thomas had inflicted. I'm fine, just resting. You don't look fine, the man said, removing his hat. He had kind eyes, set in a weathered face that had seen its share of hardship. I'm Isaac Hammond. This here's my brother, Josiah. We're taking cattle to Silver Creek. Maggie's heart leaped at the mention of her destination. Silver Creek? That's where I'm headed. Isaac exchanged a glance with his brother. It's still a good 15 miles from here, madam. And with respect, you look like you ought to see a doctor. No doctors, Maggie said sharply. The last thing she needed was someone asking questions, possibly reporting back to Thomas. I just need to get to Silver Creek. Isaac studied her for a long moment, then nodded. All right, we're camped just over that rise. Got coffee brewing and some breakfast. You're welcome to join us before we head out. Maggie hesitated. Every instinct honed from years of abuse warned her to be wary of strangers, especially men, but her body was weak from blood loss and exhaustion, and she knew she wouldn't make it to Silver Creek on her own. Thank you, she finally said, gathering Penny's reins. That's very kind. At the Hammond brothers' camp, Maggie sat with her back against a wagon wheel, sipping strong coffee that both burned and revived her. Josiah Hammond, the younger brother, kept a respectful distance while tending to the small herd of cattle they were driving. Isaac, however, seemed determined to help. Those cuts need cleaning, he said, crouching before her with a canteen and a clean bandana. Infection's a killer out here. Maggie flinched away. I can manage. Isaac didn't move. Madam, I don't mean to pry, but those are knife wounds. Now, it ain't my business who did that to you, or why you're headed to Silver Creek alone, but if you don't let me help clean those cuts, you might not make it there at all. His words, spoken plainly and without judgment, broke through Maggie's defenses. She nodded once, closing her eyes as he gently unwrapped her makeshift bandages. She heard his sharp intake of breath, but appreciated that he made no comment about the severity of her injuries. Instead, he worked in silence, cleaning each cut with a mixture of water and whiskey that made her gasp and clench her fists. My wife was a healer, Isaac explained as he worked. Taught me a thing or two before she passed. These are deep. They'll scar, I'm afraid. It doesn't matter, Maggie whispered. Nothing matters except getting away. Isaac paused, meeting her gaze with understanding in his eyes. Sometimes getting away is just the beginning. It's what you do after that counts. He resumed his task, applying a salve from a small tin. There's a woman in Silver Creek, Martha Wilkins. Runs a boarding house on the north end of town. Tell her Isaac Hammond sent you. She'll help. Maggie studied him, this stranger showing more kindness than she'd experienced in years. Why would you help me? Isaac finished bandaging her face before answering. Because someone helped me once, when I needed it most. He stood, offering his hand. Can you ride? We can make Silver Creek by sundown if we start now. Maggie took his hand, allowing him to help her to her feet. Yes, I can ride. The journey to Silver Creek was arduous. Though Isaac had fashioned a more comfortable seat for her in the supply wagon, every jolt and bump sent waves of pain through Maggie's injured face. She refused the laudanum he offered, needing to keep her wits about her. As they traveled, Isaac spoke of Silver Creek, not the dying town Thomas had described, but a place slowly rebuilding itself after the mining bust. The Hammond brothers were bringing cattle to start a small ranch outside town, having purchased land site unseen from a miner returning east. It won't be easy, Isaac admitted. Land's not ideal for grazing, but we've faced worse. What brought you out here? Maggie asked, curious despite her caution. A shadow crossed Isaac's face. War left little for us back home in Tennessee. Josiah took a bullet at Shiloh that still troubles him in cold weather. I came home to find my wife dead of fever and not much reason to stay. He glanced at her. Sometimes you have to leave everything behind to find something worth living for. Maggie understood that sentiment all too well. And have you found something worth living for? Isaac smiled, the expression softening his weathered features. Not yet, but I reckon there's still time. By late afternoon, the settlement of Silver Creek came into view, a collection of wooden buildings nestled in a narrow valley, with abandoned mine entrances dotting the surrounding hillside.